Recording.
Not there yet.
That clock's 15 minutes slow.
Right, you're ready. You good? Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the March 2nd, 2023 Town Hall meeting, Historic Preservation Commission. Roll call.
Kim McGee here. Jess Patterson is absent. Nick Mission
Here.
Eric Dowd,
Here.
Eric Seacrest is absent. Melissa Jones is absent. John Williams,
Here,
Heather McDonald here.
Okay, terrific. Item number 2, persons present not on the agenda. I see no persons present other than commissioners and staff. Although we do have a new face among the staff. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you.
So that is item number 6, but
But do we
we
wanna-
can
do we wanna-
rotate the agenda around.
Well, actually, I don't think we do. Why don't we switch it around?
Yeah.
You know, like, why don't we get to meet new people and start right
So-
out the gate?
So this is Kelly. Kelly's our new planner. I will let her introduce herself. She will be being the primary staff liaison for the Historic Preservation Commission, along with Kay. I'll still be involved as well. So it's not like I'm going anywhere, although I don't know how much of a benefit I was. But yeah, so just wanted to say that. And Kelly, you can take it away to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Kelly Amder. Started a couple weeks ago as planner for the town. I've been living in the town of Carbondale for about 10 years now with my family, husband and 2 kids. We moved here from California, but I grew up coming to the valley. I've actually had family in the valley for over 30 years. My mom is here, siblings are here. So I feel very familiar with the Roaring Fork Valley. I did my graduate studies in community and regional planning in Texas, and then worked for city and county of San Francisco for 15 years. A couple jobs before that, but a lot of current planning and design review. I don't have a degree in historic preservation, unfortunately. I'm certainly interested and thrilled to be the staff liaison to this group. Thrilled to get to work on preserving the historic character of Carbondale. But San Francisco, as you can imagine, is essentially one large historic district. We did extensive design review on pretty much every project, large and small. So I feel very capable on that front. And I've had the benefit of speaking with Kay extensively and Jared over the past couple weeks about this board, this commission, the ordinance, the design guidelines that are in place, your work plan for 23, et cetera. I'm happy to answer any questions y'all may have.
Welcome, Kelly. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Yeah,
Questions for Kelly?
yeah.
So what's your principal role going to be? Primarily working with Jared and kind of picking up those pieces?
So
or-
I've stepped into John Laybourne's position
Okay,
officially. I am the planner. And yes, working with Jared and now Kay as the planning technician on everything we do in the planning department here in Carbondale. And I will be the staff liaison to this group. So I'll be the one coming from now on with Jared available as needed.
very good.
But yeah, so she'll be taking on a lot of the current planning tasks. Given the workload, we'll kind of do divide and conquer as needed. But there's a lot of the current planning stuff that Kelly will be taking on, and then hopefully we can get our hands around that and things slow down just ever so slightly, and then we can work on some bigger picture, long-term issues UDC amendments, code amendments, things along those lines, trying to tick off a lot of the items that are in the implementation matrix here over the next few years. So, I believe that the planning staff is best when we're all kind of doing a little bit of everything and involved in a lot of the projects and aware of what's going on and can tag in and tag out as needed. So, I don't think it's going to be necessarily Kelly only does this, Jared only does that, Kay only does this. It's going to be kind of, we're all jumping in and doing what it takes to get done what needs to get done and keep the town's goals and desires moving forward. So yeah, hopefully that gives a little more context. And Kelly is more than capable of everything.
So how is the workload and when will you get to the point you can work on those longer term issues?
Well, current planning projects continue to come in at a consistent pace. Some are large, some are small. So, I think those are, hopefully with Kelly on board, we can kind of get more on top of those. Moving forward, a few larger applications that have been submitted, and a few smaller applications that have just come in. But, I think with Kelly getting her feet more underneath her, I think, it's here in the next month or two that we should be able to start looking at some of these other code amendment type items. I know we've had some conversations with the Planning and Zoning Commission. We've had some conversations with the trustees about kind of how they would like to see those items prioritized and what top priorities are. And I'm sure it's, not a surprise to you all, but I think some of the top priorities that have come up thus far are ADUs and ADU regulations and historic commercial core regulations and zoning, and other housing related initiatives, whether it's inclusionary zoning requirements or considering universal design principles, things along those lines. So, those are some of I think the top priorities. We also have the multimodal mobility and access plan that's going to be coming down the pike. So we'll be involved with Public Works and the Bike Ped Trails Commission. So, I think those are some of the big items that are going to happen here over the next, say 6 months, 9 months, rest of the year type situation.
4 to 6 months.
And then, there's one big item that pertains to this group that's on tonight's agenda that we'll get to here in a sec.
Right. Okay, well, item number 2, persons present, sorry to throw you a curveball there. Persons present is not on the agenda. Number 3, consent agenda approval of January 5th, 2023 minutes. Thank you. Budget meeting.
Of course.
Anyone have any issues, questions, comments, concerns regarding the minutes from the last meeting? January 5th?
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes from last month.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Okay, minutes are approved. CLG grant update, item number 4.
So I guess I'll start this off and then I will turn it over to Kelly and Kay to provide some additional context. But we just received notice of the CLG grant awards throughout the state. And unfortunately, we did not receive funding in this cycle. We did get some feedback from History Colorado. And they said the overall project was a great project. They really supported the the idea, the goals. They supported a lot of the components of the grant application that we submitted. And they did state that they had a extremely large number of grant requests this year, and it was a bit more competitive than I think they even had anticipated. Some of the, I think, feedback that we were asked to kind of improve upon that could have helped our score get funded was concerns about specificity regarding the budget and the components. It seems like maybe they might have felt that a pre-selected consultant and very specific budget numbers may have been better to prove that the project was kind of ready to go than us saying that we were going to get the award and then go out and select a consultant. And so I don't think they were too thrilled about the round numbers that we put in based on some of the consultant feedback that we did receive. They also had some questions and concerns about the Spanish translation and the outreach within that aspect of it. And then I think one of the larger kind of review criteria components that they had some questions and concerns about was the underrepresented communities. They didn't feel that maybe our application hit that mark as well as some of the other requests that they had received. And so I think with all of the scores that we did receive, the underrepresented communities was the lowest consistent score that we got from all of the grant reviewers. And I think we all self-recognized when we were reviewing that, what Kay wrote, that we said that was kind of one of the most challenging aspects of this grant was how do we check that box on the grant application. So I don't know if you guys, I know you guys have also reviewed some of the feedback, if you had anything else to add, but I'd certainly turn it over if you did have anything else to add. Okay.
I think the only thing I noted, and we spoke about this a little bit, was the question of if, two of the three reviewers voted to fund the project, so it clearly had some strengths, and they suggested that it might be a strong enough application to, tweak a bit and resubmit. But so it wasn't like it didn't have its strengths, but there were a couple areas, yes, that needed work. And so that's one thing for this group to consider is with the budget allocated thus far, if it makes sense to proceed with anything this year or to think about how to repackage this for a submittal again in a year.
Is it a year? That would be the next opportunity to submit.
Yep. So this is a once a year grant opportunity. And I suspect they'll kind of be on a similar timeline next year of draft requests due in end of November, early December, and then final grant requests due in mid-January, and then grant award announcements at the end of February, first thing of March. So, yeah, I think to kind of build off Kelly's comments there, I think, we're all equally disappointed that we didn't get the funding. I think it would have really helped make this project a reality. With that knowledge, kind of how do we move forward? We currently have budgeted $8,000 based on some of the preliminary feedback that we got from consultants that didn't really seem like it would cover all that much with regards to drafting design guidelines, and it certainly wouldn't kind of cover some of the public outreach, the public meetings, some of those other components. And so, I think our goal was one, to let you know about the unfortunate news, and two, kind of begin those conversations about what are the next steps with this, with the OTR design guidelines? How do we kind of move forward? Is it, do we reach out to, do we put together an RFP and reach out to consultants and say, here's the soup to nuts, the entire package of what we would like, and see what we get back, and anticipate that the responses are going to be somewhere in that 20 to 25,000 or more range that we requested the grant for? Or do we kind of revise what we would look and say, well, maybe we only need consultant services for a portion of it. Maybe it's just the drafting of the design guidelines, and put an RFP out for that and see what we get back. And, once we kind of have the RFP responses or project scope responses, depending on if it needs to be a full RFP, kind of go from there with a little bit more knowledge. Are we looking at something that's 10,000 and we have 8,000 budgeted? Do we ask the trustees for some additional funding? Do we have 8,000 budgeted, but the drafting of the design guidelines is coming in at 18? And do we say, well, maybe there's some other scope that we could do this year in preparation for a grant next year? And if we show History Colorado that we took this year and did more with the limited funding that we had, would our application kind of rise to that funding level next year? So, I think those are maybe a few options on kind of next steps. And, I, for one, would really love to hear what this group thinks and what you all would, see as maybe some potential next steps, and talk about kind of the pros and cons of those.
Questions?
Is there a list of who got the grants?
I didn't see one. No, they just sent us the feedback on ours specifically.
Hey, Jared.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Do we have to have a consultant to write this? And this is my inexperience, but I think we have a feel for what we want these guidelines to say. Is it out of the question that we would come up with language and run it by the Board of Trustees?
Kim, that's a really good thought. I thought initially a consultant, because the consultant helped us draft the initial design guidelines, that they would have some experience in this field and be able to help guide some of the guidelines, and write it in a way that's workable for designers and builders and property owners. But we do have a lot of expertise in this room among the Historic Preservation Commission. And I think you bring up a good point of, do we have some expertise in this room that can maybe provide some language? And maybe it's not the end all be all final design guidelines, but maybe we can do some more heavy lifting within this group of saying, what are these components that we want, and kind of work towards some improved design guidelines. Or maybe we can draft design guidelines, or send something out that's maybe a little more developed for a consultant to say, now, how do you take these concepts and put them into design guideline language? So I think that's certainly an option we should consider. But I'll look to the architects who work in design guidelines day in and day out to say, is that kind of
My take on it is, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. Design guidelines are pretty pretty developed in terms of other examples. And I would still like to see a consultant involved in reviewing our existing design guidelines, which are quite good, and then kind of filling in the blanks for what would be the residential Old Town component. I don't think it has to be an extensive amount of work. It would be augmenting chapter 3 with a chapter 4. And I would be interested in approaching the author who put together the original design guidelines and just see what a chapter 4 might cost. And if it's exorbitant beyond our meager $8,000, if it's, like you said, a little bit more, we might approach the Board of Trustees. If it's significantly more, we would have the financials that the review committee on the next go round for the grant requests would be looking for. So I think the board here could do a lot of the public outreach through planning staff's help. I don't know that we need to hire consultants to do that. And we could put together forums and have invite the public to review what we're proposing. So we would narrow the focus on what the design consultant would do, and hopefully be able to make some real progress. There's a lot of language drafting that would have to be done to update the UDC and bring our chapter 16, modernize its language, and then coordinate chapter 16 with the UDC. And hopefully planning staff at some point in the 4 to 6 month window here would be able to help with the drafting of that language.
And I would be able to put together the entire document.
Well, yeah, that's
Yeah.
awfully generous of you.
Yeah.
There's free labor at that. I mean, what if we just kind of step back a little bit? Maybe addressed some of the lessons learned, the takeaways from not getting the grant. I mean, is it important for us to take a step back and do some introspection on, a more upper level conversation, on some of the criticism that we have received, which is good. That's an opportunity. Before we start diving into like the weeds of actual drafting of language, let's like take a breath and try to learn something here. Underprivileged communities, right? I mean, that's what we're hearing loud and clear. That was something that we identified as a group, as a problem amongst ourselves, and then somebody said it to us. They echoed the same thing that we said. Do we need to take a good look at that? And we're talking about OTR, which is private sector, right? No question about it. How is our resource, right, dumping that resource into private sector, serving the public, number one. Number two, underprivileged communities.
What's the definition of an underprivileged community?
Oh, I don't have the CLG grant in front of me, but underrepresented communities. I think it's it's going to be more of the harder to reach communities. Typically, it includes, socioeconomic, disadvantaged populations. I think those are kind of the overarching themes, but I don't have the specific CLG grant language or definition in front of me. But I would say it's probably going to be very much along those lines because it's a term kind of widely used. So
Is that the word, or is that the term that they
it-
used? I don't
yeah,
remember.
it's I believe underrepresented.
Underrepresented communities. Okay,
Yeah.
that's a better term.
But Nick, I agree with you, and I do think it's worth taking a look at that because if at any point this community wants to reapply for this grant, I fully expect that grant review criteria is going to be included in this or any future grant opportunities. And, how does the CHPC kind of reach out to underrepresented communities, and how does it make those underrepresented communities more represented? I think that's kind of the goal of the review criteria. And I don't necessarily, I think we all struggled with how does preserving the OTR do that. And I think, we tried to tick off some of the things about, expanding accessory dwelling units and how that could provide additional housing opportunities for individuals who may not be able to afford rents or larger spaces or purchase homes. And I think we tried to play that angle, and the OTR being adjacent to our historic commercial core and having, potentially for live and work being within close proximity, reducing reliance on transportation. But, it seemed like maybe some of those angles weren't well received from History Colorado and the grant reviewers.
That's surprising. Actually, I think infill housing is a great solution to affordable housing.
And so maybe we need to do a better job at saying, thinking forward of the OTR is X number of properties, and, by looking at these codes and looking at these regulations, we could increase Y number of housing units or something like that could be used to help underrepresented communities. I think it's maybe part of it is how we presented the information, that we could do a slightly better job of. And that's not saying what Kay didn't present wasn't great information, but I'm just trying to think out loud of what else we could do that would assist with that.
Yeah, no, Kay's work was fantastic. It was a fantastic application, but it turns out to be a really great mirror as well for us to take a look at ourselves and figure out what the heck we're doing here.
I think
Is it-
go ahead, Kim.
Is it possible for us to see what was submitted by someone that did get the grant?
Oh, yeah.
Because we're
for
kind
sure.
of guessing.
Like, how did it
read? Like
the
what?
award, how did the awarded applicant handle the issue at hand?
Right. Is it quantifying and what Jared's talking about, or where did we miss the boat?
Is there any way to see, is that like public record?
I don't know. I know with the State Historic Fund, you can see who's been awarded and the awards. Unless you're participating in that project. I have never been privy to the grant application.
Sometimes,
itself.
yes, this process can be tricky because if somebody's not awarded, they have a tendency to want to sue.
So
Well, maybe maybe they would let us, maybe we could come up with some specific questions, pertaining to like what Jared was just saying, and some really specific questions that someone at History Colorado would answer for us, so we could learn that way.
Not that we would, I just want to be clear, that's not at all what I'm suggesting that we would do at all.
Thanks, Nick.
But yeah, please don't say that I'm.
Yeah, strike that, would you?
But that's the reason why it's not offered up, because they don't want to be given the opportunity to.
I have two things to say. Okay. When a regional CLG conference is offered again, that would be a time to network with other communities and chat with them, find those people who have been successful, so that's one strategy. And that was probably the most legally appropriate strategy. And then the other comment that I have is that if you look at some of the trends of where the focus is right now, Carbondale hasn't played host to some of those communities that are they're working to help preserve information about. We don't have any African-American communities in our town. We don't have any Native American communities or Asian communities. And so
We have a very large Hispanic community.
we do, but
I mean, it's almost half the population.
but it's not, and forgive me if this is not PC, we don't have a barrio in Carbondale.
We do.
And if we
Got a couple
do,
trailer
is
got
it
trailer
in
parks.
the OTR?
Yeah.
That's the problem, is that they live here, but you're trying to preserve historic buildings. Where they live, that's not congruent. But if you go to California, in some of the larger communities, those spaces have been occupied by those populations for a lot of years. And they can say, this is a historic district. We've been here for 150 years. We don't have that kind of population in the OTR. And our OTR is very, very small compared to some of the other neighborhoods that are working towards historic preservation.
Yeah, like in LA where you have Boyle Heights and Lincoln Heights and Olvera Street.
It's just a fact. So, I mean, you can use all the words you want, but what it boils down to is these properties that we're trying to encourage preservation of they don't host that underrepresented community.
And so to kind of maybe step back, and I 100% agree with Kay. I really do. I think it's hard to present the OTR as a place where a lot of our underrepresented community does live, and it just doesn't exist there. But I think to kind of jump back to what Kim recommended is,
Well, if I could just, historically speaking, a lot of those, I just want to interject here. It may not, we're talking about underrepresented communities. That OTR was created by an underrepresented community. If you dissect one of those, if you dissect one of those structures, you find that a lot of the material that those houses were built out of came right out of the dump. These were subsistence housing. These were people who were trying to survive in a harsh climate and make things happen. So, now we've got it you know, these houses that were literally built out of trash, owned by, you know, doctors and lawyers and other people who have a lot of money.
Mhm.
So it's kind of a strange juxtaposition, if you will. But not to say, I'm not complaining, but it's interesting. It's an interesting
Mhm.
place we find ourselves.
And so Nick, I do hear you. I think, you know, where I was going to go back with what Kim was saying was, you know, maybe I know the announcements just came out, right? You know, I wonder if here over the next few weeks, there might be some sort of, you know, whether it's more public announcement by award or grant winners or something like that. Maybe things get written up in the paper, local papers, and we can kind of Google search and maybe try to find a community or two that did receive the award, and we can reach out to them directly and say, hey, you know, we applied, we didn't get the award. We'd love to know more about your process and what you did. And are you willing to share your grant application with us so that we can, you know, see how you kind of answered this question, or let us learn more about what your project is and how did you address that? And so I think it's a worthy exercise of, you know, seeing. It sounds like maybe History Colorado and CLG doesn't necessarily announce their winner saying, you know, we awarded X amount to community Y for Z project. I know in other statewide grant opportunities I've been through, they kind of put that list out and say, here are the award winners, and you can reach out directly to those communities and say, well, tell me more about that project. So maybe we can do some sleuthing, all of us, staff included, and say, does something come out? You know, are we able to find something here in the next few weeks that helps us understand who did get the awards? Because somebody got it.
I do think that we as a committee, at least I for one believe that we as a committee need to address this topic of how to serve underprivileged communities.
Mhm.
I for one am very interested in how others are addressing it. Simply like,
Seems like our biggest unrepresented community is renters that can't really find a place to live.
socioeconomic,
Yeah. and-
underprivileged, underrepresented socioeconomically.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned before, the builders of our past were very scrappy and creative and gritty, and they were built with whatever they had, and they weren't necessarily craftsmen. And that's our history.
That's our history, right?
Those buildings have more than outlived their lifetime, as far as I can see. And this is how I see it, is we are kind of putting regulations on a neighborhood that possibly bought there because there was no design guidelines. It wasn't River Valley Ranch. You know, they wanted some liberty in their home. And what we're proposing to do is throw in these regulations. But what I see as a possibility of making it work is, you know, a little bit more forgiveness if it comes to an ADU. And maybe if they are able to save the original part of their structure and create an ADU, maybe we forgive some of the zoning requirements. And we don't really have the authority to do this, but maybe, you know, some parking spaces are given up, or the permeable, impermeable regulation is slightly forgiven. And maybe if those things are forgiven, that ADU is deed restricted.
Yeah, right now you have to have a certain size lot in Old Town Residential that excludes a lot of the properties from being able to put on a ADU. So that's an area that could get looked at. But I think we do want to pick up on Nick's point in that Carbondale, although it wasn't what, colored ethnic, it was certainly culturally ethnic and very, very poor. And a lot of the homes in Old Town, but throughout town are very, very modest, but they deserve recognition. And Old Red, our house in particular, is a good demonstration of the poverty that this town endured for years, in that subsequent additions were further and further relics of the town dump. You know, every addition onto that house was poorer than the addition prior to it. And that
is the history.
was Carbondale's story until the 1980s or 90s, when you know the Upper Valley affluence finally arrived. But affluent.
We have
That's the rub, right? So even though you can argue that 100 years ago, you know, that neighborhood was culturally ethnic or and poor.
I mean, it could have been
The
like
Nick
40
just
years
said,
ago.
you know, now they're being purchased by people that have means, and it's, you know, and we
But-
are being downstream from Aspen. You know, whether they intend to or not, the reviewers may have some bias. If you're trying to argue that this was a culturally poor area, but yet now you know, property values are selling for $1 million plus.
But if you threw it out there that we're kind of giving something in order to keep,
Right.
and maybe some of the older residents that we're considering selling now have a little income, a little caretaker for when they
Right.
get old, something like that.
Right.
Would it enable them to
Well, and-
continue living here as
and that-
opposed to
Sure.
selling
And-
out?
And I mean, I think those are all noble arguments. I guess I'm arguing for the sake of writing another grant. I mean, you
Yeah.
know, this is, I think it's a good conversation to have. But if you're trying to write something like this in the context of
Of the
this
grant.
particular grant, that might be challenging. I
Mhm.
think as a goal, I think it's a great goal.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, I'm
I
not
mean,
trying to argue
we have
against that,
three
I'm just-
property owners that have historic structures, and we've all stepped up and done what's right in our
You know,
mind.
I think the point to make, though, is what we're challenged to do is preserve that history, that poverty's history through its buildings.
But if you start looking at each of the buildings that we're arguing about, some of the level of historic integrity for many of those buildings has already been impacted. And so,
Are you saying impacted as in contaminated?
no, impacted in that they don't necessarily represent what they were 120 years ago. Because they've, you know, they've been upgraded and, you know, the facades and the exterior walls may be the same, but the interiors, you know, some of the additions, things like that may not be representative of how they were actually built.
Mhm.
I mean, you might have the envelope being intact, but you know, the yards, you know, there's any number of items that probably don't represent how they were 120.
That's again, the point. What we really want to preserve what we have left because it's disappearing.
But
you
then, but then, so we all say that. I mean, we're all in agreement.
this
I mean, I'm
room
not saying,
For a
you know,
reason.
we're all arguing the same argument amongst ourselves. But if you take that and you are competing against, you know, Black Hawk or Leadville or, you know, some other
San Luis.
towns that,
His encampment outside of
Right.
Denver. That
You know,
is, I
so-
mean, that's
so
truly
those-
ethnical.
you know, those are the sorts of things that we're competing against. So I'm not saying that your arguments aren't valid and that we don't have something to work with. I'm just saying that in a competitive grant
Yeah.
scenario, our arguments fall pretty
Low.
low compared to some of the other arguments that other communities can make.
Well, we
So-
can't invent a situation
Exactly.
to get this
Exactly.
grant. in a
Nor would we
sense.
want to. That would be disingenuous.
Right, yeah. So I mean,
So
You know,
question about it, that we want to work on our message. I think that, you know, they bring up some really good points in, you know, this underrepresented communities topic. I think we do want to work on our message. I think infill housing is a really good start, and then we could elaborate on that. I guess my other question, I mean, the other thing, so that's task one, right? Work on the message. Task two is, are there other sources of funding? Do we have to go to CLG? Do we have to go to History Colorado? Why don't we go Valley and see if they'd be willing to kick down a couple $100,000, which is really not a whole lot of money, to come up with, you know, something that is workable for this place.
Well, I would personally love to hear some of the property owners' sort of opinion on
Yeah,
sort of what we're proposing.
the property owners within OTR.
We really haven't had that discussion,
Right,
and they may feel very threatened by
the idea.
what
of
we're
infill housing.
proposing.
Well, I think though that your comment about the ADUs and allowing more flexibility there. I mean, it was a, you know, kind of a carrot and a stick approach to, this is what we're proposing.
Before I came over here, I had a sandwich at Pepino's, and one of the local architects was like, didn't Polis sort of create sort of an overall blanket for low-cost housing? And have you guys heard this at all? And has it hit your desk?
Yeah, so there's conversations at the state level about amending, about superseding local zoning regulations for the sake of permitting housing.
There's precedent for that.
And there is, and Carbondale hasn't spoken out one way or the other on it. But a lot of other communities have been extremely resistant to it because it takes away local control, and it does not factor in local land use considerations. It does not factor in local water rights, and the impacts that it could have on local water rights. And this is just me regurgitating what other communities have put out there in response to this. And so I think it's complicated. So to answer your question, no, nothing has been done.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, there are conversations occurring at the state level, which are intended to, in theory, break down local regulations that could be hindering residential development. And you look at some things such as, you know, historical kind of density requirements of, you know, a property's permitted X number of dwelling units per acre and things like that. And And by and large, Carbondale doesn't have that in our zoning. We have some things about, residential low density and the number of structures you can have, and some other districts require density based on the size of your lot, but we don't have kind of historical or traditional density calculations of X number of dwelling units per acre. So, I'd be interested. I don't know enough about the regulations, and I don't know enough about what Polis's proposal is to say how it could or couldn't affect Carbondale, but that's kind of the gist of where they were going.
Definitely impact Garfield County.
I mean, I think it would be great to see the local property owners, the residents have a hand in the housing issue as opposed to a big developer. And I think that goes with my earlier comment about, keeping some of the old time locals around, because now they could build, a little caretaker unit. Before, maybe it was restricted because of a parking space or a setback, something. And, we have these regulations about storage space and green space and impermeable space. I question the whole impermeable thing because, person could drain all their roofs into a dry well, and it would certainly do a lot more good for the aquifer than, somebody planting a lawn, which requires more watering than it is gaining moisture.
Oh my God, give me a headache.
Have we talked about this before?
Eventually somebody's gonna put a dry well underneath their house. That's what happens.
Well, maybe on the side of their house.
And that's $20 million, or however many $1 million it ends up being. You just increase the property, forget it, like building a house and, oh man. And
Is there-
OTR is gonna be just like the West End. $8 million proposition on a postage stamp.
Well, one question I have is if we don't use the $8,000 in this fiscal year, do we lose it?
Yes, in the sense that municipal budgeting is a year-to-year situation. So yes, that fund would roll back into the general fund. But with that being said, I think a extremely reasonable argument could be made that if we said, hey, this was used for matching purposes for a grant, didn't get the grant, worked on the message, did all these things, Board of Trustees, we would like X amount, whether it's 8,000 or 10,000 or whatever that number is, budgeted next year. I think a very reasonable argument could be made, and a compelling argument could be made for the trustees to budget it. But yeah, just with how budgeting works, it would roll back into the general fund, and it
So
would
were we
just sit in the
successful
coffers.
with the plaque program to rescue the $3,500? No.
I mean, we have whatever was budgeted for this year. But last year's budget was not used,
With
We're
that,
not gonna be able to dig into that
not from last year's, not
Pay-
last year's, but
pay
we
for
have
the-
this year's.
so I don't know the exact amount budgeted for this year. I thought it was,
I don't remember.
I don't know the exact amount off the top of the head, but there is Plaque funds available for this year. But no, we don't. Last year's budget is gone,
Okay.
regardless of what it is.
So
Didn't we
let's
have like
spend the money.
9,000?
Well,
So 1,500 for the plaques and then the rest was supposed to be the matching grant?
sorry. But no, you bring up a good
Yeah.
point. Like, we need to keep this ball rolling, and we probably should allot some time to the plaques. Is it okay if we table
have just
this.
a short comment. Has there been any type of identification of the underrepresented population in Carbondale? Do we know exactly where we're talking about trying to target?
I mean, I think we could look back at the CLG grant and figure out exactly how they define that term. And I think we could pretty quickly say they're identifying these areas or these types of populations.
So that'd be something we would need to kind of keep in mind as a target for rewriting or redoing our proposed grant. And also from what I've been hearing, it seems to me it would be good for us to get together and do kind of a summarized bullet point kind of thing for what we want in our new design guidelines, so that when we do apply for it, we're stating more about what it is we want and what we want a consultant to help us fine tune, and therefore we're kind of got more in mind of what we're adding in for ADUs here around, and being able to target the underrepresented population, and just go through and know more about what I think that's kind of what we've all been saying.
I think so too. I think we need to work on our message before we start talking about consultant, unless you're talking about having a consultant help us with our message, which I don't know.
At the end.
At the end. Okay. I'm sorry. I just we need to wrap this up. Can we table this conversation and put it on next month's agenda?
Yep, and we can come back with the feedback that we received and give you guys a little bit more to respond to. We just found out 2 days ago. Yesterday. So I don't even know what day it is. So we haven't had a lot of time to digest. We just more wanted to share with you our initial thoughts. So yes, it will be on next month's agenda and we can dive deeper.
Thank you. And thank you for the great info. This is a great topic. I'd really love to circle back on this. You had a question about the plaque in particular. What was it? I'm sorry.
Our budget, didn't we budget for $1,500 for the plaque this year again? And then the rest was the matching grant. Wasn't it 9,000 we got approved?
Top of 5 now.
Would be information in, information out, so I don't have it right.
I'll see if I can't pull up the budget on our website and get an answer back to you if you guys want to continue with just the plaque update
Yeah, because
as a whole.
we are now in the red, I think, pretty. I don't know that we're gonna make our goals.
Not really, because we changed the manufacturer of the signs themselves. And we've gone from $300 cost to $45 cost.
Yep.
Well, that's nice. That's
Yeah.
a big difference.
That's a big difference.
You want the
between
update?
Local and Denver.
Kim, what was that?
Yeah, we've got 9 plaques in production right now, and the total for all 9 of those is $319. They should be finished within 2 weeks, maybe before.
So how's that for keeping us out of the red?
That's amazing. I don't know how you did that. I
Well-
need someone like you to help me with something else.
No, actually, I can't take full credit because Heather found a different material. We just went to a different company. And people in town seem to be happy with the different material. The problem was what we were trying to make them out of. The price just kept going up and up and up. So we'll see. I mean, people in town just all of a sudden woke up and jumped on the bandwagon when they owed us $24 instead of $150. So all of a sudden we were able to make some progress.
Well, I'm happy to hear there's a lot more people interested, and I'm happy to hear that there's a high volume of applicants as well on our previous topic. With regard to the CLG grant, it sounds like there's a lot of interest in history preservation right now. Just out there in the state of Colorado. That's fantastic.
And you know, Nick, I worked with History Colorado on a tax grant for when I painted my house. And they're really great at responding, and it was really a good experience. And they said, there's a lot of money here, so have at it. So
Great. Well, this is all good news. Historic plaque updates. Any other topics, questions, comments on, or sorry, questions, comments related to that topic? Plaques,
I can answer the budget question if you want.
please.
So looking at the 2023 budget, it looks like the CHPC as a whole has an $11,000 budget. I believe the request for the historic design or the OTR design guidelines was 8,000. And so that would, based on my math, that's $3,000 left over for other endeavors, including the plaque program. So if the plaques are coming in at a little bit less, maybe there's a little bit more to pursue some of this other work. I'd just throw that out.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Well, we gotta kind of get the timing down right, because we're gonna, once we finish this round of these plaques, we're gonna put it right back out to the rest of the historic homes and do a whole nother round next year or this year,
Mhm.
which is gonna kind of run into the same problem of having it on this year's budget, but we're gonna finish it up in next year. So we're gonna have to kind of get that timing down a lot better than this first round for these signs where the plaques were a learning experience, and we'll owe a lot of appreciation to Heather and to Kim for wading through all this
Mhm.
BS for the very first round, and hopefully we'll get this done a lot quicker and better and cheaper for this next round.
Yeah, just to kind of finish up, I think Kim is going to be contacting the people that have requested plaques and coming up with a time to actually install them. John and I have taken on the role of actually doing the installation. We may approach the commission and the budget if somebody wants to put a plaque on a post as opposed to on the fence, if there isn't a fence. You know, my suggestion was to use cedar posts because that's what the town has been using for their bicycle paths, and cedar is a long standing natural product available at the co-op, but the cost of the post is more than the cost of the sign. So
Well,
but the digging will volunteer ourselves. I've got a good shovel and a bar.
And the strong back.
he's
Weak
got the
mind.
bag. The post that I bought one of them because the Ezra's were, I was trying to talk them into doing it. They put theirs on their mailbox post. It's it ended up being around $25 for a 6-inch by 7 foot or so post. And then there's labor for peeling it because there's all the cruddy stuff that's on it, the bark. And then got to flatten out a spot to put a flat sign on a round post. So there's $25 worth of material itself, and then the labor to doing it will solicit somebody to do it like myself or Eric or the high school or somebody. But just to let you know that there's more to it than just getting the post and digging a hole and screwing it on.
Mhm.
So I guess I'm soliciting volunteers right at this very moment. I don't see very many hands. That's okay. Moving on, I'm done.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. I mean, that's it. Well, that's what we've got. We're actually right on. We're 5 minutes over. This is a really good meeting. This was a really good conversation that we could carry on to the next.
So you had mentioned that, you know, we didn't really have a proposal, a strong number for what it would take. And do we do sort of a RFP for soup to nuts or the more economic streamlined version? And could you do both as an RFP and kind of select which one seemed more doable?
Yeah, I think we could probably draft an RFP in a way that says, we would like a component quote on the various components, with a request to do all of the work, but at a minimum,
This amount.
do this one component or these two components. I think we could draft something in that way to see if someone would be willing to respond, and certainly going to the person who wrote the original design guidelines. That's who we reached out to, and that's where we got kind of the good guidance on
That'd be
the number
Susanna
that
Reed.
we were put in for our grant request. So I think a lot of it's going to be us giving her or anybody else more detail about specifically what it is. So I think to John's point, if we're saying OTR guidelines are going to involve this specific component and it needs to respond to these 5 or 6 design goals or things like that, that would help more develop that RFP that then we could put out, and maybe the number goes up or down or gets more specific. So I think that would be a great next step in kind of developing that.
Design guidelines for infill housing in particular.
That could be something that we say is a critical component.
Yeah, it's definitely a part.
Infill housing or preservation or design guidelines specifically related to ADUs. I think we could go a lot of different ways. I think maybe that's where some of the nebulousness was on the grant request.
Yeah.
That's for me. Don't worry about it.
I was wondering. Okay. That dinner.
Do we know who got
Plan
the,
sets.
the town center proposal? Because that was like, what, a couple months ago? Everybody was, the town center stuff?
Yep. So the town center development, the town selected art space. Art base is in Basalt, right? Yeah, so art space. I always get the two mixed up. So the town selected art space as the developer and signed a pre-development agreement with them. And so now we are working through kind of the early stages of the fact finding to figure out what they believe could be developed there and what the needs are, and if there are other partner agencies that can either bring resources, needs, future space, planning, things like that to the table. So that's kind of where that process is. We expect that's going to happen throughout the rest of this year, and probably is going to trickle into next year.
Okay, well, is there any more? Is there any other question, comments? Do we want to entertain a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
Okay,
Boom, boom.
so adjourned.
No, we gotta vote.
We don't need to do a vote on adjournment, do we? I don't even think we need a second.
Then I abstain.
You're staying here forever.
Thank you all very
Right.
much.